So we find ourselves today in Romans chapter 12, verse 9. Romans chapter 12, verse 9. Before we get there, let's talk for a second about where we have been. Last week we talked about how suffering and using our gifts and talents helps us conform to Christ. Romans 5:3 said, not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. Now, where in our suffering we see rapid sanctification or that we become more like Jesus, and using our gifts, we are to encourage one another. Last week we read Romans 12, verse 4. For as in one body we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function. So we, though many, are one body in Christ, and individually members one of another, having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us. Let us use them. And in that passage, we see how we are to use those gifts. So if the Christian life is about becoming more like Christ, then what does it look like to be like Christ? What does a Christian look like? Now, I want to say this real quick. Before we move any further, I have a warning or an anchor that we want to put down here. You see, the temptation when we read a list is that we want to use it as a checklist. That I'm going to do these things, and if I do these things, then that means that I am right with God. That is not the purpose of this. We've talked in previous weeks that as believers, fruit will be produced. That as we grow and love Christ, that we will be effective. But more often than not, instead of using it as a checklist for my own life, we tend to use it as a weapon against people that we don't agree with. That we look at these and we say, well, that person over there, they're not loving genuinely. That person over there, man, they're proud. It can be a temptation to look at others and see where they fall short according to this standard. Both of those things are wrong. Why? Because what this should be calling us to do is to be examining our own life, to be using it as a magnifying glass. You know, I was thinking of James chapter 1, verse 22. We're going through James in our life group right now, but it says, but be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and then goes away and at once forgets what he was like. But for the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing. What is this talking about? Well, this morning, you know, my in-laws were up from Ohio, so they lovingly took our bedroom, and Sarah and I, we took the couch. And so when I woke up this morning, sleeping on one of those couch pillows, which is terribly uncomfortable, I'm going to throw that out there, and I go to the mirror, I saw some things that were wrong. My beard, for some reason, was pushed straight forward. My hair was matted to one side. I had gunk in my eyes, and I had dry drool on my face. Nobody wants to hear this. I get it. But I walked in there, and I saw that in a mirror. Now, if I looked at that and just said, well, I guess that's who I am today, and walk out of the bathroom and come to the church, is it the mirror's fault that I look like that? Not at all. No, the mirror was supposed to be a tool in order to show me the things that need adjusted. So as we look at what the marks of a Christian are, what we should be doing is saying, how do these things line up with my life? What area of my life needs some work, needs some adjustment? So let's read this upcoming passage with that heart. So what are the marks of a believer, of a Christian? Well, Romans 12, verse 9 tells us, let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal, but fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. As I was preparing this, I was trying to think of an example that can drive this home for us. So I'm going to make a statement today. What if I told you today that I was a professional basketball player? I feel like some people in this room might disagree with that statement. Definitely the teenagers in the youth group. If I were to tell you, no, I am a professional basketball player, that should give you pause. Why? Well, it would be fair for you to say that even though I say I'm a professional basketball player, the fact that I can't shoot, pass, dribble, jump very high, or just generally know the rules of the game, it's fair to say that I might be mistaken. So here we see things that are supposed to be present in the Christian life. If we are a Christian, these things should be present. If we've put our faith and our hope in Jesus Christ, if we trust that we are a new creation, then these things should in some capacity be there. Now it's important to realize that here we see things that should be progressively present in the life of every believer. We're not going to be perfect right out of the gate. None of us are. I was thinking of Paul and Peter. Paul and Peter both loved Jesus, but had two very different stories, two very different lives when it came to their relationships with Christ. Paul killed Christians and persecuted the church, got saved, and then from what we can see in Scripture, just seemed like a rock star right out of the gate, right? Like, he was fervent, he was effective, he didn't seem to make a mistake after salvation. Peter, on the other hand, walked with Jesus, was responsible for doing some amazing things, followed with him sticking his foot in his mouth. Jesus, you are the Son of the living God. A few verses later, what did Jesus call him? Satan. He walked on water. That's amazing. A few verses later, what happened? He sunk because of a lack of faith. No, Lord, I will never deny you. A few verses later, he denies him. He swims to the shore to be reconciled with Jesus after his resurrection. A few verses later, he's wondering what the persecution that's going to befall one of the other disciples. Even after Jesus died and in the start of the church, Peter was there when the first Gentile came into a relationship with Jesus Christ. That is wonderful for all of us in here, right? And then a couple of chapters later, or in Galatians, we see that Paul had to confront him to his face because he was acting like a hypocrite. That he was shying away from the relationships with the people that the religious Jews didn't want him to have a relationship with. Both of these people were beloved by God, but two very different journeys in their faith. That should give us confidence today. These things might not be all present right now, but they should be progressively present in the life of a believer. Just as we progressively become more like Jesus as believers, these things become more present and visible as we grow, as we suffer, and as we serve. So what are these things? Well, the first one is this. Let love be genuine. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Have you ever seen before fake or shallow affection? I would say so. I have a couple of really good examples. Have you ever heard somebody say about somebody else, well, bless their heart? Is that nice? It sounds nice. I mean, you want to bless their heart. I have never heard bless your heart meant as an encouraging thing, but more condescending, let's be honest. Have you ever heard somebody say, oh, honey? Is that encouraging? Is that meant to celebrate the person? No. It might sound good, but it lacks depth. It lacks a realness. You see, right out of the gate, what the mark of a healthy believer is that they love genuinely. I want to be clear about this today. I want us to get this. Love is hard if it's real. I want to say that again. It's simple, but it's what we need to anchor down to today. Love is hard if it's real. In Corinthians, what did Paul say? Love is patient and kind and long-suffering, and it endures, it hopes all things. What did Jesus say in Matthew? That the whole law hung on loving God with everything and loving your neighbor as yourself. Love is not just this emotional feeling, but it's an action that is very difficult. So what are some of these difficult things that love is in this passage? Here we go. Love one another with brotherly affection. Treat people who aren't your family as if they're your family. I mean, that's what we're doing here today, right? That's what the church is so good at, hopefully, is that in this room we are not all related, and yet we seem to spend a lot of time together, caring for one another. A mark of a Christian is that we treat people who aren't family as if they are family, but it goes on from there. Outdo one another in showing honor. Now, I want to be clear real quick, this isn't about people-pleasing. I remember when I was training in ministry, I had told a pastor that I was a people pleaser, and he said, no, you're just proud. You're treating people a certain way because you want them to treat you a certain way. You're treating people well so that they can congratulate you. That is not what this is saying. But that we should be looking for an opportunity to celebrate one another, not ourselves. Have you ever met somebody like this before? That you try to give them a compliment and it seems like they're ready with an even nicer compliment? You try to show them love, but it seems like, man, they already had a way to show you love? That is outdoing showing honor to one another. But then it gets even more difficult there. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Bless those who attack us. Think about for a second who is saying this. It's the Apostle Paul. You know, we read 2 weeks ago, or last week, we read Romans 11:28. As regards the gospel, they are enemies. So the Apostle Paul is writing to a group of people that are actively being persecuted. And the person that's encouraging them is the person that once persecuted them. As regards to the gospel, they are enemies for your sake. But as regards to election or the sovereignty of God, they are beloved for the sake of their forefathers. Who is saying that? It's the man that the beginning of his story was that he persecuted the church. He was at one time, in a very real and physical way, their enemy. And yet, he would become one of the greatest missionaries of all time. So he is telling these people, those people that are attacking us, love them. Why? Because we don't know what God's going to do. But I want to say this because I think this could be difficult for us today, and I don't mean to ruffle feathers. We are not here facing persecution as much as we are facing inconvenience. You see, there are people that hate us, that is true. But I have been here now for 2 years, and I have yet to see somebody drug out of here because of what they believe. I have seen people being treated badly, but I have yet to see in my 2 years of being the pastor here somebody stoned in the parking lot. Somebody in prison. That stuff is happening all over the world. There is real persecution, but sometimes we can equate our inconvenience to persecution. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but I want to say this, and I want us to get this today. If we can't help but to curse those who inconvenience us, how are we going to bless those who actually persecute us? I want us to get this today. Because if we can't seem to bless those who are inconveniencing us, if we can't help but to lash out against people that are making it difficult to be a Christian, or difficult to live this life, how in the world are we going to bless those that throw stones at us? No, it starts with these little things, and that compounds to the larger things later. I'm going to move on from that. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Simple question today. Do we hate what is against God's glory and His commands? Do we hate what is against God's glory and His commands? Let's bring that a little bit closer to home today. Has your favorite TV show ever mocked God or celebrated sin? The show that you love, the show that you watch, the one that you wait to come on in another week. Has that show ever mocked God or celebrated sin? My question to that is, what is your reaction when that happens? Do you laugh? Do you wince a little bit? Do you turn the channel? Do you find an excuse to leave the room? What is your reaction? I'm not trying to bring shame. I'm not trying to beat you up today. Just honestly examine your life. What is your reaction when your family talks bad about God or celebrates sin? Your closest friends, your coworkers, how do you initially react? You see, as you grow in your relationship with Christ and become more like Christ, we should be less comfortable with things that God is against. But it gets more positive here, because I think sometimes we as Christians have a reputation of just being against stuff. Just being curmudgeons, angry and grumpy all the time, against all fun and joy. But that's not what this says. It also says to hold fast to what is good. As we grow closer to Christ, we are going to enjoy and pursue what is good. We've talked about over the previous weeks how this is something that we already do. We already celebrate the things that we love. We already celebrate the things that we conform to. Something that we love and something that is a big part of our lives. We surround ourselves with those things, right? We talk about those things. We invest in those things. So what is this saying? Yes, as Christians, we should hate what is evil. We should hate what is against God's commands or celebrates sin. But at the same time, we should replace with those things that are good. We are called to enjoy. And it goes on further from there. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. What is zeal? It is passion. It is a dedicated and enthusiastic pursuit. So it seems like to be slothful in zeal would be contradictory, wouldn't it? Yeah, I think about our son. For the next 18 years, he is going to get sermon examples, and he can't do anything about it. But I was thinking about our son. We fight with him in the mornings over trying to get ready, or Sarah fights with him in the mornings over trying to get ready, and sometimes I will help, or I will be told to help. And I could think usually one of the fights or the arguments that happens is over brushing his teeth. So we're getting ready. She's getting ready to take him to preschool, and she yells from one of the other rooms, "Go brush his teeth." And so I say, "Hey, Archer, it's time to brush your teeth." He drops what he's doing, and then he runs away from me at that moment. Usually at that moment, I make a big scene of chasing him down. I'm shuffling my feet. I'm pumping my arms. In his perspective, I am pursuing him. But it's not a passionate pursuit, right? It's joking around. Now, on the other hand, there is times where Sarah and I will be in a living room, and then we will hear the front door open and shut. He has just learned how to open the deadbolt above the door, and he has escaped once or twice, I'll say that. I'm going to say something. At that moment, I am not pumping my arms. At that moment, Sarah is not shuffling her feet. It is a passionate, enthusiastic, active pursuit of our son at that moment. Why? Because we are terrified something bad is going to happen to our child. That he is going to make it to the road, so we're not faking running after him. We are sprinting through the house, through the door, to protect him. Why do I say that? We should not be passive in our chase and pursuit of God. This is not about what ministry you serve in. This is not about how many ministries you serve in, but a simple question for each and every person that calls themselves a Christian here today. Do you serve God with passion or passivity? Let's be honest. Even as the pastor, sometimes I serve God in passivity. Sometimes I go through the motions and I'm not actively and dedicated chasing after the God that sacrificed so much so I could have a relationship with Him. A mark of a Christian is a passionate pursuit of God. But it moves on from there. We are to rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer. What this is telling us is that when we struggle through difficulty, we should look past the pain to the hope. Now, how can we say that today? How can we say that in the midst of tribulation, suffering, pain, sickness, that we are to rejoice and look forward to the hope? Well, the Apostle Paul told us in Romans chapter 8, verse 28, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to His purpose. Why is this a promise for every believer today? For those who love God, we know this, that all things work together for good. How can we say that? Because we as believers get God. Understand that. Yes, we will face suffering. We get God for eternity. Yes, we have pain. We get God in the midst of it. We have the promise from the sovereign creator of the universe that no matter what we go through, that we have security, that we get to spend eternity worshiping, glorifying that God. How can anything matter to me if that's what I get? That is what gives me the ability. If we believe that we get God, that it will definitely end in our good, then we should be willing to wait. And in the midst of our struggle, in the midst of our suffering, we should be ready to go to God in prayer. Understand something. This isn't a chore, but a response to the amazing grace of God. Then it goes on from there. And I want to say this, where those things are difficult, it gets a little bit more difficult. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. I am not trying to preach a sermon on tithing today or on giving. But what I would like to do is I would like for us to take a look or take a second to look at the early church. In Acts 2, verse 42, listen to these crazy people. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And awe came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things in common. Here's where it gets tough. You ready? And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all, as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. I want to say something about the early church. They weren't being forced to give to charity or guilted into tithing. They wanted to give. They wanted to give because of their love for each other. They were looking for an opportunity to be generous. And I want to say something real quick. This goes contrary to what we are being fed on a daily basis. This goes contrary to what we see in media and what we see on the news. Is this passionate pursuit to live in generosity. You see, this generosity is what sets the church apart. You don't see here in this verse any accusations that they got themselves into that situation. You don't see here them saying if they worked a little bit harder, they would have more. That's what we hear today, though, right? It's not what the early church was. No, they were looking for an opportunity to be generous. And I want to say this. I'm not telling you today to sell all you have and give the money to the church. Give the money to me. It's not what we're saying. I'm not telling you to sell your house. I am asking you, are you willing to open up your house for fellowship with other believers? I'm not telling you to sell your property. Are you willing to open up your property for kids and youth programming to use it every once in a while? I'm not telling you to sell your boat. I'm asking you, are you willing to take out some distressed and people going through some difficult times to just rest and relax out on the water? I'm not telling you to sell your car, but are you willing to use it to give people a ride? I'm not telling you to sell your stuff. My question is, are you willing to sacrifice those things in order to bring God glory? And this is the thing that frustrates me about my own heart and about Christians that I see. If we are to be like a Savior that gave His life, why are we unable to sacrifice our stuff? Think about the absurdness of that. Think about what Christ did on the cross. Though He was in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but He made Himself of no reputation for us. He took upon Himself the form of a servant for us. He humbled Himself unto death for us. Even the death of the cross for us. He took upon Himself the wrath of God on our sins so that we could be reconciled with God for eternity. That was for us, and yet we are unable to sacrifice our stuff? How ridiculous is that? I'm not telling you to sell all your stuff, but I am asking you, if you are a believer, are you willing to use it for God's glory? I'm not asking you that. That's an accusation against myself. Because oftentimes, let's be honest, I'm not. Heaven forbid. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. I want to say, this is life on life. My question is this: as brothers and sisters in Christ, how intimate are you in our relationships with each other? How vulnerable are you willing to be with one another? You see, if we are not celebrating with each other, if we are not suffering with each other, if we are not living life together, are we really a family or just co-members of a club? But it goes further than that. Not only are we to love and celebrate one another, but the people that we spend time with shouldn't be stroking our pride or elevating our status. That shouldn't be the goal. We should pursue relationships with both the people with a mess as well as those that have it all together. And as we build those relationships, it shouldn't be for our pride, but for their benefit and God's glory. I want to say that again because I think we miss this sometimes in Christian service. It shouldn't be for our pride, but for their benefit and ultimately God's glory. And if you think that it couldn't get difficult from there, it just gets a little bit more difficult. In verse 17, and this is where we're going to finish today. We're going to camp here for just a little bit. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. And if possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. To the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him, and if he is thirsty, give him something to drink, for by doing so you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. This is where it gets difficult. You see, we just spent time talking with people, talking about relationships with people that we tend to agree with. But what about our enemies? What about those that deserve payback? Well, listen to how difficult this is. Repay no one evil for evil. Why? Because our natural drive is eye for an eye, isn't it? Like, we want eye for an eye. That they did that to me, I'm going to do that back to them. That's what we teach our kids, right? Someone pushes you, you push them back. Someone hits you, you hit them back. What is this saying here? Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of Christians, in the sight of our family, in the sight of people that we like? No. In the sight of all. Think about this. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Let's talk for a bit about those that we think of as against us. Those that want us to do something that we don't want to do. Those that want to impose something on us that we don't want to do. What is that asking us to do? To live peaceably with those people. You know, what is our first response? It's to resist it. You know, I was thinking about the pandemic that we just were getting through. And what's amazed me is the Christian response to people trying to tell people to do things that we don't want to do. You know, the videos that I see of people berating the grocery cart handler in the parking lot for telling them to wear a mask. And I'm going to be honest with you. I don't want to wear a mask. I don't. I haven't wanted to the whole process. I have been frustrated in going back to my car to grab my mask because I forgot it. We were in it for a year, and for some reason I couldn't remember to keep it in my pocket. I was bothered that when I would talk to a complete stranger in the grocery store, they would move very quickly away from me, not wanting to talk to me because I was probably patient zero. That was frustrating. That was difficult. And every part of me would have wanted to just say, you know what? You can't tell me what to do. I'm going to do what I want to do. And if it bothers you, it bothers you. See, what is our first response? It's to resist those people, to do what we want, no matter how it makes them feel. But I'm going to offend some people today. So just be prepared. What is the biblical response to that stuff? Let it go. That's tough. Let it go and seek ways to get along. You see, if that is to those who inconvenience us, what about those who actively wrong us? Well, the natural reaction to that is to get payback, to get what's ours, to see them punished. What is our response to those people? To love them. You see, this isn't telling us to hope that God judges them more harshly, but to trust that God will deal with them in the best way to His glory and not our feeling recompense. You know, when I was preparing this, I was thinking about the story of Jonah. One of my favorite stories in the Old Testament. If you don't know it, I'm going to recap it really quick. There's this guy named Jonah. He was a prophet. God goes to Jonah and says, hey, Jonah, I need you to go to Nineveh, and I need you to tell them that their wickedness has come before me, and I'm going to destroy them because of their wickedness. Does Jonah listen? No, Jonah goes the opposite direction, goes to Tarshish. They're on the boat. There's a storm that hits. And Jonah admits to the crew of that boat that the storm is coming because I am disobedient to God. So they throw Jonah overboard. He asks to be thrown overboard. Now I want to be clear real quick. There's no other story that I've come to in history where somebody has used a whale or a giant fish as a taxi to get somewhere. So what? Jonah being thrown overboard. I am speculating here that he was assuming that he was going to die. He was saving those people, but he was going to die. Fish swallows him up. While he's in the belly of the fish, he admits to God his sin. Gets spit up on shore. And then one of the funnier parts of the scripture, God tells Jonah, hey, Jonah, I need you to go to Nineveh and preach to them this message. Jonah goes to Nineveh, preaches the most discouraging message I've ever heard in my life. Y'all are wicked. Y'all are going to die for your wickedness. I don't think he said y'all, but I'm paraphrasing. He leaves the city, goes on a hill, and he's waiting for the show. He is waiting to see God's wrath fall upon his enemies. But even though his message was discouraging, they repented before God. And as Jonah waits, he sees that God's wrath isn't coming on those people. How do you think Jonah responded to that? Well, we're going to see it in Jonah chapter 4, verse 1. I'm going to go ahead and read it. But it displeased Jonah exceedingly. He was angry, and he prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, is not this what I said when I was yet in my country? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish, for I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. Jonah hated these people. And what Jonah knew was that even though these people were very wicked, he understood the character of God. What did he accuse God of? That you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. You see, if we would rather vengeance to happen, then we are missing the heart of God towards them, and we are forgetting the mercy of God towards us. You know, I read that at one point, and I thought that God is going to get judgment. I've heard that preached before, that God is going to get payback for us. We just need to wait for God to get payback on sin for us. And I want to be clear about something. God did get payback for sin for us. It was on the cross of Christ. Think about this. At one point, we were enemies of God. We were enemies of God. And then Christ came, and instead of receiving the wrath of God, the appropriate consequence for our sin, instead, because of the sacrifice of Christ, we received peace with God. Where did the punishment for my sin go? It went on Christ. Think about this for a second. That person that has wronged you, that person that has sinned against you, God has gotten justice for that sin as well as your sin on the cross of Jesus Christ. This is not calling us to hope that God punishes them, but to remember for a second that we received peace with God while we were still His enemy. We would rather vengeance to happen on those people. We are missing God's heart towards them. We are forgetting His mercy towards us. How do we sum all of this up today? If we were to take all of those things and we were to sum them up into one thing to take away today, how can we do that? If we are Christians, we are to deny ourselves. We are to love others, all for the glory of God. Hey, Christian, how are we at doing that? And if there's areas that we're not great in, hey, there's mercy for that, and we are to progressively grow. The question is, are we willing to grow in those areas? Every head bowed, every eye closed, no one looking around.